We will call the Environmental Commission meeting of July 27th to order at 7:02 p.m. Matt, will you please call roll?
I will. Commissioner Apple?
Present.
Commissioner Hutton? Councilperson Frenzel? Commissioner Graham? Commissioner Morocco?
Here.
Commissioner Mursky, or Commissioner Appleyard for Mr. Mursky? Commissioner Needham?
Here.
Commissioner Rigo?
Here.
Commissioner Skinner?
Here.
Commissioner Slavic?
Here.
Councilperson Smith?
Present.
Commissioner Gibbs-Randall?
Here.
And Commissioner Hanna? You have a quorum.
All right. You all have a draft of tonight's agenda. Are there any additions or corrections? Is there a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The agenda is approved. You also have in front of you draft minutes from the June 22nd meeting. Are there any corrections or questions about the meeting minutes? Is there a motion to approve the June minutes?
So moved.
Councilperson Smith, a second. Commissioner Apple, all in favor?
Aye.
The June minutes stand approved as distributed. Now I will briefly read this for anyone playing the Ann Arbor District Library summer game. The game code for tonight's meeting is Green Team. That's all caps and no spaces between the words green and team. Again, the code is Green Team. For those of you on Twitter, please resist tweeting out the game code. Now that we have that under our belt. Public commentary. Is there anyone here to give public commentary?
Yep.
Please state your name and address, and we ask that you limit your comment to 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Wendy Zeeland, and I'm a almost 40-year resident of Ann Arbor whose family homestead is out at Silver Lake. Silver Lake, as many of you are aware, is about 15 miles northwest of here, and we have found ourselves in a very unusual circumstance that affects the city of Ann Arbor. Several months ago, in March to be exact, we found that the trees were being cut down, ringing our lake, which has about 90 residents. And I'm going to speak loudly because it helps if I point this out. This is the lake. It's a state park. These are all the residents. What we found was that the Rover pipeline, which we had been told was to go this way, is now ringing the lake. So, how does that affect Ann Arbor? It does so in 3 different ways. The first is
Can you go to the mic and he'll help?
every week on Saturday and Sunday, we get about 2,000 visitors, and a lot of them are from Ann Arbor. So that's number 1. Number 2, the Ann Arbor YMCA has their day camp out at this lake. And it turns out that the day camp is less than 300 feet from the center line of this pipeline. That puts them in the blast zone. The blast zone for this goes right where my finger is, all the way around. Before you're dead, it's called the buffer corridor. That's the official term. Afterwards, it's the blast radius. So the Ann Arbor YMCA kids are trucked out there every day, and they're left there. The Federal Pipeline Safety Administration says that this is a guillotine failure. So something happened, and I won't go into that, but after about 4,000 pages of reading all of the filed materials with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, we found out that this wasn't supposed to happen. That pipeline was supposed to go this way, and it didn't. So, number 2. Number 3, and of great interest to you folks, is that Silver Lake is a spring-fed lake. there's one drain, it comes out right here, and it goes to Portage Lake into the chain of lakes, and 12 miles downstream is where the Ann Arbor drinking water intake is. So, in Ohio, they had a 5 million gallon spill by the Rover pipeline in April that the feds shut them down in Ohio, and they shut down the one place in Michigan where they're going to do this. Actually, they're going to do it in 3 places. Under I-94, under M52, it's called horizontal directional drilling, and they're going to do that right there. So if that happened here, what just happened in Ohio, where the Ohio EPA, right now they're taking it to their Attorney General, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is maintaining that that procedure cannot happen. If they start doing that and the same thing happens, then Ann Arbor is going to have a real drinking water problem. So that's 3 reasons. Now, on to a couple of other things. So all of these people, the YMCA camp, this is a hunt and fish club, the state park, which has 500 parking spaces over here, they, if there is a pipeline emergency, and they do happen, and they have happened by this company on the same size pipeline, there's no evacuation route. We are the only community in this country that has that problem, number 1. Number 2, even though, and I'm sure we will have another speaker here on this issue, even though the YMCA camp and the Post 46 puts us into what is determined to be a high consequence area, which you've heard about with Nexus, they're not going to give us any odorant and no warning. Number 3, we found out that the one and only drain from this lake, nobody ever took it into account. I've pulled all the construction documents and I've gone to the MDEQ, and we've gone to our senators, and we've gone to the Washtenaw County commissioners, and I've been in Washington, and we've taken it to the governor. Nobody will stop the permit. We're going to be flooded. So I'm not here to ask you to do anything unless you want to talk to the governor or the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission or call our senators. Again, they're on board. And I want to make Ann Arbor aware of what we're up against, just 15 miles away. I've got
Thank you.
some handouts. If you want them, I'll put them over there. It's got the map. It's got the most recent letter that I sent to everybody above us. And it also has a map of where this directional drilling is, Portage Lake, and the Ann Arbor drinking water. So you can take a look and let me know.
If members of the community want to get involved, where would you direct them?
Overwithrover.com. I personally maintain that, and I answer all the questions, and unfortunately, it's become my full-time job, in addition to my full-time job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for your efforts in doing this. I mean, unfortunately, it takes community activists willing to do this, and I just want to thank you for your efforts.
We thank you. I am here to tell you the senators have listened very well, and Washtenaw County commissioners, and we have gotten, with all the motions that we put out, which is a lot, I am looking at something over 450 hours in drawing up these motions. We engaged a lawyer. We have received 0 response. So thank you for listening, because that's a whole lot more than we've gotten from a lot of other places. So we, Michigan, West Virginia, Ohio, they've halted it. Michigan, no response. So we're not expendable. We're going to make our voices known. Thank you.
Is there anyone else here for public commentary?
I just wanted to add a few words.
If you could state your name and address, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Sure. My name is Rebecca Schnetzler, and I'm here with the Ann Arbor YMCA. So my address, my work address is 400 West Washington Street, just down the street from you guys. And I'm here as a representative of the Ann Arbor YMCA. Part of my responsibility as the Vice President of Youth Development is to look at the safety of all of our children. And this pipeline going in is a major concern for us. Our day camp, Camp Burkett, which is a very popular camp here in Washtenaw County, has about 110 campers on site each day for the 10 weeks that we run camp, along with about 15 staff members. And it is a site where children are dropped off at the beginning of the day, either by their parents or by bus, and then are picked up at the end of the day. if there was a pipeline emergency, our children would be trapped, not only because of where the pipelines go underneath the roads, but also because we would not be able to get buses out there through the roads to get to the kids. So we would be talking about a water evacuation for children as young as 5. That's not acceptable. We're looking at this to make sure that our children are safe. We're going to handle this in the same way that we would handle fire drills, tornado drills, et cetera. But we would be looking at having to start doing pipeline emergency drills with our kids. We have major concerns about that. And, you know, we've done a lot of research in terms of what the other options are, and we would really like to have your support in looking at what the other options are and getting it placed back in the original location, which would have us out of the blast zone and would give us an evacuation option for our children. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
have a question, and I kind of walked in late, so my apologies, but is there a reason why they won't move it so it's outside blast zone?
I'm going to hand that over to Wendy.
They have never.
If you could come to the
mic
microphone.
So that members of the public can hear.
Thank you.
In the paperwork that I handed out, you will see that we have filed 2 motions federally. We've sent letters to the Army Corps of Engineers, who's responsible for the nationwide permit, that never looked at this. We have never once received any response to why we are being asked to take on this undue risk. Nobody's ever responded. There is a response from September 9th last year, which was after the public commenting period when the environmental impact statement, the final environmental impact statement, was put out to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission so that they could and did end up on February 2nd granting eminent domain. It says, well, we can't cross the power line at a 13-degree angle. If you go up to Island Lake Road now, you will see that the same pipeline is now in between 2 large power lines. We've looked at this, we've gotten opinions, there is no good reason. There's one response that says there's something in private that we haven't been able to access, but they say they didn't do a test on the Mississauga rattler. We've actually found rattlers in the wrong spot, doesn't matter. We have no response. We only have conjecture, and I can't obviously state that. So if you all know anybody who could find out for us, we'd like to know, because we are stuck with a radioactive pipeline feet from the children and all of our houses, and everybody who visits.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else here for public commentary? If you could state your name and address, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Yeah, my name's Michelle Dietrich, and I'm Vice Chair of the Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners. My address is 5630 Meadow Lane, Superior Township. I am here representing myself and not the Board of Commissioners. But the Board of Commissioners has, however, twice passed resolutions opposing the Rover pipeline, and particularly recently addressing the lack of odor that the pipeline developers propose not to put the odor in, so that if there's a leak, no one will be able to smell the leak. In fact, we just had an incident in Washtenaw County last week where a backhoe went into a small pipeline. Everyone smelled it, they evacuated, nothing happened, but this is a 42-inch pipeline, and they're not going to put an odor in. Why? To save money. So there's been a monumental failure on the part of our federal government, and the questions that you've been asking are the questions that the activists in the community and the Board of Commissioners have been asking. And the problem is that we have a federal regulatory agency, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is basically a rubber stamp, and they don't ask the questions that you're asking and that they should be asking. And I just want to say this is a really pressing issue, but it's part of a bigger issue. And you know, after Rover's done, they're going to build Nexus up the east side of the County, right through urban areas of Ypsilanti and within 100 feet of a school. U.S. gas moved by pipeline has more than tripled in the last, natural gas amount has been more than tripled in the last decade, and there's more coming. This is almost all meant for export to the markets in Asia. And I want to tell you why I think this is the most pressing environmental issue facing us. The fossil fuel industry is acting in a coordinated and very well,
One more.
Okay, I thought I was done. Okay. Is acting in a very coordinated and well-funded way to ensure that natural gas extraction and export facilities continue to be increased. And I attended the National Association of County Officials Conference in Columbus. It represents 75% of the counties. Washtenaw County was the only county voting against resolutions supporting the Keystone Pipeline and a resolution supporting the increase of liquid natural gas infrastructure nationally, trying to talk fast. That means the considerable lobbying power of that organization is going to be behind that. That is the result of some good, solid planning. That's what we're facing. You all know how the problems with natural gas, methane as a greenhouse gas, and the problems with the huge amounts of extraction going on from the fracking fields of Appalachia and Texas and Georgia, and they seem to find more every 6 months. So I find this to be heartbreaking. I really do think it's the biggest issue facing us. I know it doesn't seem like a city issue or maybe even a county issue, but I think it is. Please help as you're able. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else here for public commentary? All right, moving on. Is there any unfinished business before the commission? No, moving on to new business. We have a presentation from Josh McDonald. He's going to give us an update on climate metrics.
Hello. Okay. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Josh McDonald. I work in the Sustainability Office along with Emily Drennan. I do metrics, some program management stuff, and today I'll be talking about Ann Arbor greenhouse gases. So let's dive right in. These are Ann Arbor's greenhouse gases. As you can see there, the green bar, that's community emissions. The blue bar is the University of Michigan. The University of Michigan emissions are a little bit tricky because while they make up a large portion of Ann Arbor emissions, they have their own climate action plan. So we don't really have that much direct influence on U of M's emissions. If you could see that green line there, the light green line, that shows community targets. And if we're looking from 2000 to 2015, we actually came under our target. So it's about an 8% target, and there was about an 18% reduction from 2000 to 2015 in Ann Arbor's emissions. In the presentation, there's kind of 4 parts. The first part's going to explain some of those reductions, so that 18%. The second part's going to look at forecasting greenhouse gas reductions. So kind of looking at DTEs, I don't know if you guys have heard the 80% reductions by 2050, taking those things into consideration along with CAFE, and seeing how that affects our emissions, our greenhouse gas emissions. The third section looks at reduction strategies, so what the city can do to basically meet their targets. And then finally, kind of a wrap up or takeaway. So understanding the numbers. I took a look at DTE's greenhouse gas reductions from 2000. So the Michigan Public Service Commission, which is a state regulatory agency, basically sent a 10% renewable portfolio standard. And what that means is that utilities have to have about 10% of generation come from renewable sources. If you go to DTE's website, those 2 pictures there on the left are screenshots from DTE's website. You'll see that they only have about 7.74% renewables in their fuel mix. They make up the rest through RECs, so renewable energy credits, kind of work the same as any other kind of credit. and then as well as sales versus generation. So they count their fuel mix based off of sales versus generation, meaning that DT sometimes sells things to Ohio. It wouldn't necessarily count within the MPSC's 10% renewable portfolio standard. They also quote about a 15% reduction in greenhouse gases from 2005 to 2015, and about a 21% reduction from 2000 to 2015. That comes, again, partially from the renewable fuel mix, but also from things like upgrades to existing power plants, and then energy optimization programs as well. So I looked at DTE's fuel mix. I also looked at North Campus Research Center. So it was acquired by the University of Michigan from Pfizer in 2009. Since the acquisition, the North Campus Research Center is no longer considered part of the community's emissions. They're part of the University of Michigan's emissions. So I wanted to see kind of how much that would play into that 18% drop we saw from 2000 to 2015. This is just kind of a summary slide here. If you see the kind of darker colors there, so usually 2000 electricity is in the dark red, 2015 is in the orange, same with natural gas, that's what NG stands for, transportation. We saw about 21% of the reduction was attributed to DTE and their fuel mix. About 3% reduction in electricity was from North Campus Research Center. 9% of natural gas was from North Campus Research Center. So then the question kind of arises, where does that other 7% come from with electricity and natural gas? I took a look at weather patterns. So I took a look at the averages of 2000, 2015, looked at heating and cooling days. And while there were slight variations, they were pretty similar. So these are actually 2 good years to compare. There isn't that much variation. So probably not likely attributed to weather. There are other things too, like equipment. So furnaces, there was about, let's see here. Furnaces used to be about 75 to 80% efficiency in the 90s. They've gone up to about 90 to 97% efficiency more recently. Furnaces do have about a 15 to 20 year lifespan, even though I'm sure there are people who probably keep their furnaces beyond that. So that could, count towards some of that 18% reduction. Another thing too, LED lights. So if you consider that LEDs have reduced conventional light bulbs from about 60 watts all the way down to about 10 watts. It's a much smaller number. Energy Star appliances, and then probably one of the harder things to kind of measure behavioral changes as far as people just using less electricity, turning the lights off more, and things of that nature. So we kind of tried to explain that 18% reduction. So looking forward, what kind of things could we expect to influence our emissions? First thing, so CAFE standards. Currently, the target of CAFE standards are about 39 miles per gallon. The actual, so if you take all the cars on the road and do an average, it's closer to 29 miles per gallon. In general, CAFE standards are kind of complicated. Because people can use, so for example, car companies can use credits towards them. It also depends on the fleet, so how many trucks you're selling versus passenger vehicles, things of that nature. By 2025, there's a call for 46.5 mile per gallon. And then, again, when you actually factor in all the cars on the road and what it's actually going to come out to, it'll probably be closer to about 38.5 miles per gallon for passenger vehicles and 30 miles per gallon for light trucks. Again, after explaining all of this, there's a slight chance that this will all be irrelevant because it's currently under review at the federal level. We don't know if 2025, the standards, the targets that they set are still going to be in place after they review them. But again, kind of the DTE's 80% reduction by 2050. So they're attempting to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 80% through 6,000 megawatts of additional renewables, 3,500 megawatts of natural gas, retiring 11 coal plants, and investing in the grid as well as gas infrastructure. So it roughly comes out to, by 2050, a 40% renewable, 40% natural gas, 20% nuclear fuel mix. And if you can see there, I've gone ahead and taken energy, so the electricity, Ann Arbor's electricity, greenhouse gases, took into consideration what that would do to our greenhouse gases for the electricity sector. From 2000 to 2025, you see about a 30% reduction, and then from 2030 to about 2050, that's where you get the bulk of the reduction, about 50% of that. I went ahead and applied these two things and forecasted out. So this is what, 2000, that's what the makeup looks like. 52% of our emissions are coming from electricity, 21% natural gas, 24% transportation, all the way out, I forecasted to about 2050, taking into consideration DTE's 80% reductions and the CAFE standards. If we see here, by 2025, just based off of CAFE standards and DTE, we actually do make our target, but by 2050 we miss it by a long shot. And again, that kind of has to do with some of these the plans that DTE has for greening its grid. So reduction strategies, if we saw one slide earlier, the natural gas transportation being a large sector of that 2050, what kind of things could we do to actually target natural gas and transportation, since those would be the two major sectors that would be still left over by 2050. Residential energy efficiency programs. I went ahead and took a look at all the programs that are currently implemented, both in Ann Arbor. So DTE has the largest penetration rate at 4%, roughly 4,487 homes. And the cost is close to about $1 million, and about 10% energy saved based off of houses that have actually undergone their efficiency program. I also put on here the biggest loser. So Holland, Michigan has this biggest loser program. And basically what they're attempting to do is based off of the show, like the TV show of Biggest Loser, they're trying to see who could save the most energy. They actually had about a 36% max, so that's the person who was the biggest loser. They reduced their consumption by 36%. So after looking at actual programs, I wanted to see what the potential was for energy efficiency programs. If we see here, this is from Energy Information Administration. The example comes from Chicago, 2011. So as far as weather goes, it's probably a good comparison. They get similar climate. Low end, high end, it totals out to about 48% to about 58% savings from these retrofits listed out there on the left-hand side. But again, I mean, this is just the residential sector, so there's also commercial and industrial. We haven't really taken a look at what kind of programs are out there for commercial and industrial, and I'm sure that if we applied some of the energy optimization programs to those sectors, we'd see pretty big reductions in emissions as well. Finally, Ann Arbor solar potential. So it's roughly about 78.46 megawatt total potential, with about 68,000 MTCO2e saved if we were to take all these different sectors. So this comes from, I should back up a second. This comes from LIDAR information that we got from our solar subcommittee from the Energy Commission. And they took a look at total potential for the city, broke it out based off of different sectors, and these were the totals that they kind of came out to. So, major takeaways. By 2050, again, natural gas and transportation, if everything that DT says they'll be able to do actually is accomplished, and CAFE standards continue to hold, again, natural gas and transportation will be the biggest sectors that we'll have to kind of target. So some of the recommendations are possibly looking at taking our solar program and using it towards things like electric vehicles, maybe using it towards water heaters. So maybe you're going to get more into that natural gas and transportation sectors. Thinking outside the box with the solar. And then finally, this kind of big takeaway here. By 2050, we, as you see, that green bar, the light green bar, we miss our target by quite a lot. So we really do have to start planning and thinking about these things now if we want to hit our 2050 target. All right. Are there any questions as far as? Yes.
How do you measure it? Are you actually taking grad samples? Is this, like how do you,
Yeah, sure. So DTE gives us kind of rough numbers for use data. We can take that information and turn it into greenhouse gases. I go ahead and then apply some of the information. So if we were to take the grid and let's say that it was greener than it is today, go ahead and take the emissions per megawatt hour. So it's kind of like a calculation. And you go ahead and factor that out, and you can see the comparison. So if we had a greener grid, for example, there was less greenhouse gas emissions per megawatt hour. How would that compare to today?
So how do you measure transportation?
Transportation comes from VMTs, so vehicle miles traveled. We have one for the city internally, as well as externally, the highways. We go ahead and take VMTs based off of things like miles per gallon and do a calculation that way.
Can I
Yeah.
jump in quick?
Yeah,
So
please.
there's WATS, the Washtenaw Area Transportation Study. They provide data to us based on models of how much driving happens in the community. And that gets this VMT number. So they give us a number that how many miles traveled by light-duty vehicles and heavy-duty vehicles, and put this all in spreadsheets, and it's a guess, but it's the best guess we can get in this transportation sector without going to Google, because they actually know which cars and how far they're going. And then, you asked about testing emissions. We're converting everything from, if you use a kilowatt of electricity, we know based on DT's fuel mix, how much is nuclear, how much is coal, carbon. And so again, it gets into a spreadsheet that gets calculated. So we're not measuring any atmospheric emissions. This is all based on how much energy did you use and how much carbon's in that energy, and then we make that calculation. So.
And have those models, has anyone ever tested the models to see what the model says versus the actuality? Is there any way to measure this stuff really?
I actually don't know the answer to that. What I can tell you is these are protocols for measuring greenhouse gases that have been vetted both nationally and internationally. So
Yeah, a lot of the conversion factors that we use are EPA. Usually there's a laboratory where these things are tested, and they're constantly coming out with newer numbers. So one of the tricky things with these inventories is I'm constantly revising them to kind of make sure that they're most up to date. Even with VMT, there's definitely an art to it. And how we calculate it, there's decisions that have to be made as to what we should include highway miles or not, for example. And whether, scope 2, scope 3, whether that's going to actually affect Ann Arbor and their, greenhouse gases. So. Yeah. Are there any other? Yes.
I had a question about eye graphs that showed waste management actually increasing in greenhouse gas emissions as the total carbon dioxide emissions dropped. Is that legacy from the landfill?
So there's a couple of things, maybe two parts to that answer. First of all, these are estimates, so they're going to be kind of vague with waste management, for example. I put in whatever we know today and kept it as constant. That's not going to be the case, obviously. It's mostly just influencing with a lot of the predictions I did. Again, this kind of DT, the utilities, just because they're the largest chunk of emissions. So that's kind of the first, I think, part of that answer. The second part of the answer is that these are proportions. So for example, if you have electricity going down, as you see in that 2050 number, down to 5%, it's even if waste management stays the same, which again, in these models it does, it's going to become a larger proportion, just based off of, proportions off of a pie, a total. Is that?
So it doesn't necessarily take into account whether there would be more or less greenhouse gases coming out of the landfill?
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah,
Well, I know there'll be less from our landfill.
Yeah, I only took into consideration the things that I kind of presented on,
Okay.
just to give you an idea. Yeah.
I think my question probably follows in line with that. Did you do any kind of modeling or assuming around changes in electric and gas demand with improving?
No, and that does complicate things quite a bit. I mean, energy optimization both gets at use, you know, I mean, that's really where, if you're looking at energy optimization, it's not only electricity, but it's also natural gas. And this is one of the things where I could only go so far in this presentation to kind of explain this back-end stuff, because I wanted something that was, you know, obviously manageable. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely this divide between, you know, utilities. So whatever DTE is putting out is going to be generation, and whatever we do with energy optimization is going to be use. And there's an interplay with that as well. So it's a good point.
Yeah, Josh, I think this raises a bunch of next steps. So,
Yeah.
you know, what Josh has done, and it's an amazing amount of work. You can't tell you how much back and forth has gone on to create this, but, you know, it shows that, you know, DTE has made this commitment, and it's great, and it's going to really help reduce the carbon in the electric sector. I think one of the big takeaways is if we don't pay attention to the natural gas and transportation, and there's a lot of I think, good estimates that we could start thinking about with how are we going to electrify heating and decarbonize that? How are we going to electrify transportation, decarbonize that? That could get built into the next step in this analysis, and we would love any thoughts and input on that. But, you know, we're just kind of getting into, this is our first deep dive into these data.
Yeah.
Well, it seems, yeah, if I can just expand on that, it seems like a great way to think about targeting resources at the main areas that might need addressing.
Yep.
Moving forward.
Sure. Anything else?
Sure, a couple of comments.
Yeah.
I've seen this before.
Yes.
Great job again. I think it's important to realize that although what DTE wants to do is a good step in the right direction, that they're starting out as probably being the largest polluter or producer of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. And they're basically trading out a bunch of very old coal plants that are totally uneconomic for natural gas. What we really need to do is get away from combustion entirely. And it's unfortunate that they're going to natural gas as much as they are, because when you build the infrastructure, including the pipelines, you're committing yourself to using them for 40, 50, 60 years. It's important to realize in the slide that Josh showed about the amount of renewables that they were going, or solar they were going to put in relationship to the amount of natural gas. Those are nameplates. They don't include the, what do you call it, the amount that it actually produces per year. So for instance, solar, you get about a 20% capacity factor or 23% capacity factor. Wind is about in the 40s in the thumb. A natural gas plant, which has a steady supply of natural gas, may run 90% of the time. So although it looks like they're doing more with renewables than natural gas, it's not really the case.
Yeah, and if we see that slide, even there's like 40% coming from renewable, 40% coming from natural gas, even though, again, those nameplates, the capacity on that slide look like a lot larger, I mean, as far as renewables go. When it comes to actual generation, it's a different story.
And the other thing that I always like to mention on this is that it's not only where we get to in 2050, but how fast we get there, because it's the area under the curve. It's the amount that's produced interim that's going to produce the temperature that we have to deal with. And so moving to renewables faster is, and doing more efficiency is going to be in our best interest. And it's important to realize that 2050 is a long ways away, and we can't really predict what kind of efficiency we're going to have with things. If you think back 10 or 15 years ago, nobody was really using LEDs, and that's really changed things now. It's hard to find a dim enough LED to put in your hallway anymore, because they're so efficient that they're, you know, the smallest ones are really pretty bright. So there's a lot of things that can happen. You know, solar used to be so expensive, almost nobody did it, and now that it's in many parts of the country, it's competitive with natural gas. So, and they're moving to natural gas now because it's cheap. And what it's going to be in 10 years or 15 years is anybody's guess, really. So, but good work. This is really important stuff. Oh, the other thing that isn't figured in here, I don't think, is consumption.
Right.
Which I've seen figures of 20 to 30% at least additional greenhouse gas emissions from consuming things. So,
yeah, there are like scope 2 and scope 3 where you
Yeah.
can actually get into, you know, lifetime generation.
buying stuff that's made in China and shipped here on boats
Yeah.
that produce incredible amounts of greenhouse gases because they're running number 2 bunker fuel. A lot of things like that play in, so.
Yeah, so I would reiterate kind of Matt's point that this is kind of a first preliminary view. And even, for example, looking at electric vehicles and pairing that with solar, seeing what kind of impact that would have, I thought that'd be a really good follow-up to something like this, so.
And they're now looking at the possibility that electric vehicles are going to take over a lot faster than anybody's predicting.
Yeah, well, with Volvo, and I think it was Volvo that.
Volvo says they're going to do hybrids and total hybrids and electric vehicles in like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And places like, several places have said that by 2040, they're going to outlaw diesel and gasoline engines, period.
Yeah, so that's definitely part of it. All right.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, I would really quickly just like to thank Wayne, the Energy Commission, for making this what it was, fellow staff members who looked at different iterations of this, and Susan Hutton, who isn't here, who also helped me a lot with trying to kind of make this a manageable presentation, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, we have a presentation on the Washtenaw County Solid Waste Plan by Jeff Kuchmarek.
Perfect. How are you? Like she said, I'm Jeff Kuchmarek. I'm with Washtenaw Counties. I'm the Environmental Program Supervisor, and I support the Washtenaw County Board of Public Works because the Board of Public Works for Washtenaw County is the state-designated planning agency for solid waste. Every county in the state of Michigan has to have a solid waste plan to identify their goals and objectives and to assure that there's at least 10 years of disposal capacity for the residents of Washtenaw County. And being in southeast Michigan, as you may know, disposal capacity is not an issue. There's plenty of space for disposal in Washtenaw County. So, however, we last updated our plan in 1999. That was by order of the state. And we cannot update our plan until the state tells us to, but we can amend it when we are approached by somebody who wants to make changes to our plan and wants to be consistent with our plan. So we have a landfill in Washtenaw County. Advanced Disposal owns it. It's called the Arbor Hills Landfill in northeast corner of Washtenaw County. And they wanted to expand the landfill, so they had to amend the plan. So in 2015, we received a letter from Advanced Disposal and had undertaken the process of amending our plan. And the state spells out how we are to do that. There's a process we have to follow and a format that we have to use. We can go above and beyond that format. However, we need to follow it to make sure we get all the objectives done and do it right the first time. So we appointed a committee, a 14-member committee of different various aspects of the waste industry. And Christina Gomes from the city was on the planning committee, and Megan Bonfilio is also on the committee, and she's the Chief Deputy Water Resources Commissioner for Washtenaw County. So those are 2 active members. The other 12 were busy on vacation. No. Anyway, so we have since then. There we go. So since then, we have received problems with the landfill, and Advanced Disposal withdrew the request for expansion because of a problem with odor emissions. And it was an issue due to the fact that Republic Services owned the gas removal system for the landfill, and as previously mentioned, natural gas prices fell, and the natural landfill gas was not as profitable, and not much infrastructure was put into the removal system by Republic, who owned the gas removal system that is underneath the landfill that Advanced Disposal owns. So it's a little complicated, but due to a Department of Justice ruling, the landfill was broken up into different segments of businesses. The disposal portion, the gas removal portion, and the waste to energy portion was all split up. So that means there wasn't enough coordination between those three agencies to do a good job removing the gases. And in the process, gases escaped, affected the community in Northville with odor issues, and that had to be remediated. So finally, the gas removal system that was owned by Republic was taken over by Advanced Disposal, and things are moving on the right track right now, although there are still blips in the road. So getting back to the solid waste planning process, we decided to update the plan anyway, even though the request from Advanced Disposal was withdrawn. And the first thing we had to do in 2016 is look at the public feedback and what the public perceived we needed to do for improving solid waste services in Washtenaw County. We sent out surveys through social media and at county events and other methods to find out what's important to people of Washtenaw County to address solid waste management issues. As you see, they wanted more recycling opportunities of materials closer to them. They wanted food waste to be addressed in terms of organics, and litter prevention was another issue that we received in feedback form from the residents that completed the surveys. And we had 372 responses, so we thought that was a pretty good response. So we kind of took this information and came up with some guiding principles regarding how our solid waste plan would look. And on your right, the access and convenience was a big issue. People wanted to have easier access, make it more convenient so they don't have to drive to the other side of the county to get rid of a TV, or wait for that one day when we show up in their community for a cleanup day. They want more diversion and recovery and less disposal due to the fact that more trucks on the road is an environmental issue, also impacts the roads. We want to make sure that we keep as few trucks on the road as possible in Washtenaw County. We also need to educate and provide outreach for folks because not every municipality has the same hauler and don't take their materials to the same MRF. So our educational capabilities are really hard when we have different messages throughout the county. You can take glass here, you can't take glass here, they collect styrofoam there, they don't collect styrofoam here. So getting a message out to folks through education, through single messaging would be a great help if we could make it so that's uniform around the county. Data and measurement. We found that it was one of the most important principles because currently we don't have any requirement for municipalities to report what's being taken out. So it requires us to call haulers to find out how many routes they have, how many customers they have, look at some averages, do some spot checks of trucks to figure out how much material is being collected curbside and taken to processing facilities. And it's just kind of fuzzy. It's not hard numbers. We'd like to find a better way, and there are ways of doing this by licensing haulers. That's one method we could look at. Also, funding. We rely on a tip fee host community agreement that we have at the landfill. So we get paid to run these programs through Arbor Hills landfill. So we would like to get off that method because there's a life to the landfill. It has about 15 years of capacity, and we need to think of different ways of managing our programs and finding resources outside of that method to fund these programs. And also coordination and collaboration. We see a lot of opportunities here between the private, public, and nonprofit section to coordinate efforts. We do have a few examples, which I'll show you later on, of that coordination and collaboration. So one of the first guiding principles is access and convenience. We run these single-day collections out in the outlying areas of Chelsea, Saline, Northfield Township, up by Whitmore Lake, and by Eastern Michigan University. These one-day events where we take these materials that are not allowed to be in the landfill, like tires, freon-containing appliances, large bulky items. So we have these days set up so we can take household hazardous waste, electronics, and a wide range of materials. So it's a one-stop drop. We want to make sure people don't have to go anywhere else when they bring the materials into us. So we run 4 of these a year, and it's not really convenient. As you can see, the queue line is pretty long. Some people have to wait 20, 30 minutes. and it's kind of cumbersome. And it's only done once a year in their municipality or in their locality. So we're trying to figure out ways to make it more access, provide better access to get these materials, hard to drop off materials, better, more available to those outlying communities. The City of Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County commission resource recycling systems for commissioning a study to look at the feasibility of siting drop-off stations, enhanced drop-off station, comprehensive drop-off stations throughout the county. Dave Stead is here. I'm going to leave that to him. He's up after me, but this is some of the demographics we're looking at in terms of convenience, where we currently have these drop-off stations for single-stream recycling with Washtenaw County, and how many folks have access and how far do they have to drive. That's a 20-minute ray that you see out there for folks to drive to a drop-off station to get rid of recycling. Dave's going to go more into that, about other opportunities to enhance drop-off stations and relocate and enhance or provide better services. The guiding principles. We're looking at reducing first, reusing second, and recycling. So the reducing is one of the most important parts. The opportunity to get rid of materials at different agencies throughout our county, especially on South Industrial. There's 3 or 4 facilities right there that can take used materials and repurpose them. We need to find more opportunities for residents around Washtenaw County to do so. There needs to be more opportunities to get rid of that couch or those clothes at a more convenient methodology for the residents. We need to reuse. One of the things that we've been looking at is providing composting, master composter classes, so that people can take food waste and inside their home and make it into a commodity by enriching with the castings, their topsoil, and relying less on fertilizers. So we're looking at composting and also the purchasing habits. We had the Taste of Ann Arbor, and we had some vendors who had non-compostable products, and we could not compost as much because they did not purchase the right product in the front end. So looking at purchasing habits by those vendors next year will be something that we're going to be considering and look at pricing, how we can get lower pricing for those per unit costs for those materials. That's one of the biggest inhibitors, and that's why styrofoam is cheaper and used more often. Next, we have education. We're looking at all ages of folks. We have a grant, or you had a grant with WISD, the Washtenaw Intermediate School District, and we currently have 16 schools which we work with inside the schools to provide education to the students through the Ecology Center. We provide waste audits to look at where there's opportunities in each school. We identify champions in the school because not every school has the same champion. It's not just the facility director. It's just not the principal, it's the teacher. It could be any one of those, and you have to weed those out from every school. So we've been working with schools to collect the white office bond paper, which has high commodity value, and we've been having it shipped to the Resource Recycling, or Western Washtenaw Recycling Authority, and they get a better price for that commodity when it comes from schools, because if you get kids taught the way that to increase the value is to create, the single stream of this high-quality paper, that it pays off and it will get recycled. We also provide education at our zero waste events. We have a partnership with Amcor, which is a rigid plastic manufacturer, and they have a research facility in Manchester. They provide staff at our zero waste events to man the collection booths where we ask they put the compost, recycling, and the waste. And it gives gives the opportunity for an expert in plastics to talk to the citizens about why you recycle plastics and what that plastic is and why they use this plastic for this purpose. It's a really neat facility in Manchester, and they have a lot of information to provide us about recycling and the plastic manufacturing business. But we also use those folks to educate our citizens at these zero waste events. So they are required, they require their employees to provide some time donating to those community efforts, and that's one that we tapped into. As I mentioned, data measurement, it's hard to get really good numbers. We can do it. Currently, our recycling rate's at 33% within Washtenaw County. The state average is 15%, so we're well above that. However, we have opportunities with commercial recycling. And the amount of people in Washtenaw County, the households, it's only 66% that have a municipal sponsored curbside collection program. So the other 34% have to go to subscription hauling, and some communities have 4 or 5 trucks driving down the road collecting the recycling. So we want to reduce that, look at franchising more services or having single hauler or coming up with other arrangements to reduce the amount of trucks on the roads. So we generate about 291,000 tons a year. That translates into 291,000 cubic yards in the landfill. So we're taking up space. However, we still have 15 years of space available at the Arbor Hills landfill. Funding, like I mentioned earlier, we rely on tipping fees, and we need to think of legislative methods, perhaps, to look at creating long-term sustainable funding to run these programs to achieve our goals. And we are going to be approaching some municipalities in the area to see what we can do and offer some approaches that may be feasible. And I mentioned we had coordination and collaboration. I mentioned we had with some private sector. We also have some landfills and processing facilities in Southeast Michigan. Southeast Michigan is rich in landfill space. We do have a few MRF operators in the county. However, we've been calling the haulers to find out where they're taking the materials, and they're going all over. They're going outside the county. They were going to the facility on Napier Road, the Arbor Hills processing facility, and since the Ann Arbor MRF closed, we've been shipping it out of the area. So we got to figure out how we can coordinate and collaborate to find how we can create local processing facilities. We have disposal facilities, is not a problem, but looking at how we can coordinate and collaborate to get more effective processing facilities in Washtenaw County would be helpful to help enhance our recycling programs. Some of the programs that we run, I'm not quite sure if you know about it, but we have a household hazardous waste collection program. We collect around 500,000 pounds of household hazardous waste from county residents on an annual basis. These are pesticides, solvents, paints, oil-based paints and stains and varnishes. We run it on the first 3 Saturdays of the month out at Zeeb Road. We get quite a participation rate, usually around 250 cars every Saturday. But these things, they keep these out of the landfill, and it provides a safer landfill. And diverting these to other locations and made into industrial grade furnace fuels is what we do with most of these materials. The pesticides, we get subsidized by the state of Michigan, by the Department of Agriculture. So we spend about $30,000 a year redirecting pesticides out of the waste stream, and we get reimbursed by the state for it. So that's a partnership that has saved us money over time. We also have a shrink wrap program. We work with local marinas in the springtime when the boats get their shrink wrap taken off. We contract out with a single hauler, and the marinas collect this shrink wrap, bail it up, and at no cost, the processor will collect it and ship it to a processing facility and make it into a commodity. So that's a partnership program that we're pleased about. Another one is the Pharmaceutical and Sharps Take Back program. We have 13 pharmacies within Washtenaw County that will take back unused pharmaceuticals, excluding liquids and narcotics. But we formed a partnership and promote the Red Barrel program, which does allow law enforcement to collect narcotics. This is one of the most toxic waste in the house. It's the smallest, but people always would want to bring it to us, and we thought of methods to work. Back in 2006, I think we had our first meetings with local pharmacy, the pharmacy board, to figure out what we could do locally, and we have one of the first in the country back in 2006 in Washtenaw County to partner with existing pharmacies to take back unused pharmaceuticals. I mentioned earlier we have zero waste programs. We worked for Grilling with the Hungry out at the Farm Council grounds last year and this year we had a 92% diversion rate. And so that is not only a diversion, but it's also education. It's point of contact with the customer and going out there and telling them why you need to divert this waste and how you do so in your home. We also did this at the Taste of Ann Arbor this year. We only had 17 out of the 42 vendors, though, participate in purchasing the post-consumer products that we could compost. So we're going to work with the Downtown Association to get more of those businesses to purchase compostables before they start serving food at that event. We worked with other events, the Saline Summer Festival, the Saline Fall Festival, and we did the Beer Festival in Ypsilanti. We also have a recognition program. One of the portions addressing business waste is letting folks know what other businesses do to reduce their environmental impacts. We started this, the White Waste Net program back in 1999, and a few years ago we changed this into the Environmental Excellence and Partnership program to recognize all those who are doing things in our community that are reducing waste. We are including the rain gardeners that are working to reduce the amount of stormwater that's being sent to stormwater collection basins. We also have the Master Composter program, which goes around and works with schools and other institutions to divert through vermicomposting or on-site composting of waste, organic waste at facilities. And it gives us a chance once a year, in March we hold it, and it gives us a chance to hear the stories of others. And it can be inspiring and ask more questions and create partnerships so that folks can do it themselves and find out who can do it in their community like them. It's been a really successful program, so we want to continue that, but that's part of the educational component of our solid waste plan. And one of the ones we also partner with the Ann Arbor Parks, Ann Arbor Rec and Ed, is the Master Composter program, where we have, through Rec and Ed, you can sign up and become a Master Composter. It occurs in the fall. I believe it's 7 classes, and then you have to do your capstone project. And so it provides an educational opportunity for us to get out there and talk about food waste and compostables and what people can do and how they can share that information with others to reduce their impact on these organics. So those are the components of the plan. The public comment period for the plan has been extended to September 18th. We've already held a couple of informational meetings and one public hearing last week. We got to share information, which I had just shared with you, with folks, and let them provide more input. And so you still have time to get online and send us your comments. Take a look at the plan. It's on our website, and I'll give that to you pretty soon. Once we get the plan approved by our designated planning agency, we're going to be coming back to the City Council and asking them to approve our solid waste plan. So that's one of the reasons why I'm here tonight, is to let you folks know that this will be coming to the Ann Arbor City Council for their approval, maybe by the end of the year. We have to see how it goes in terms of the comments that we receive and any revisions that we have to make. So our Board of Public Works would approve the plan, and it goes back to our planning committee for final approval. Then the Board of Commissioners have to vote on it. Then it comes to for local municipalities, and we have to have 67% approval by all 28 municipalities within the county to get this passed, so we can send it to the state for their review. So that's how the process works. The draft plan can be found here at www.uwashington.org/SWP, or you can come to our office. And you can comment by sending us an email at publicworks@uwashington.org. So after that, after the plan gets approved, as we hope it does next year, early next year, we're going to set up a planning action committee, and we invite any one of you to be a participant of that. This is where the rubber hits the road, and we talk about methods and funding and all these guiding principles I just mentioned, and how to meet our goals and exceed. We really would like to we have zero waste as our target. That's what we aim for, and we'll see how close we can get there. Any questions?
So in the very beginning, you talked about these sectors kind of not coordinating well, and that's why some of the gas issues were happening.
Yeah.
And you talk about coordination and collaboration, I'm just wondering what mechanisms do you feel like you are putting in place to be able to ensure that coordination and collaboration can happen?
On that end, on the solid, we really don't have any ability because it's up to the state and the EPA. It's out of our hands. We don't regulate the landfill. It goes directly to the state. But what they've learned, it was owned by BFI years ago, and BFI owned the landfill, the gas removal system, and the waste to energy plant. And when BFI sold it, they made them split it up. The Department of Justice made them split it up, those three segments. And so I hope the federal government learned that when you split it up, especially among competitors, because Republic's a competitor of ADS, Advanced Disposal. So it just kind of set it up to me as like the lack of cooperation be more, more beneficial for them. But
There's no mechanism to things like that to encourage or...
no, it got sent to the Chicago EPA office for problem, and warnings and violation letters were out, and they had to come up with plans to remediate the odor issues. So it was sent right to the EPA, those problems. It just is not in our legislative capability to oversee those things. Sure.
Hi, I'm Megan Bonfilio. Jeff mentioned me earlier. One thing I would say is we have, over the past 2 years, developed a really strong relationship with Advanced Disposal. So through the process that they've gone through the odor complaints, through very active participation from residents from Northville, we have started to have a series of stakeholder meetings. We have had, I think, 4 of them now, and we continue to have them on a quarterly basis. That has helped tremendously. We are distributing out information that way. They have been encouraged and have done so. They've created this portal online where they're starting to communicate out to the community in a little bit of a better, more proactive way. And then additionally, we're looking at adding some provisions into our host community agreement that we're working on negotiating, that is between the county and the landfill, that will allow us a little bit more teeth to help them. If they're not listening to either the DEQ or the EPA, we are in there also, but we really don't have an enforcement arm, as Jeff mentioned. So I just wanted to make sure I added that piece in.
Thank you for your time.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
A couple of questions. So you said the target is zero waste. What percentage zero waste are you trying to target? I mean, there are cities, Premier in California and whatnot, that are trying to really reach the zero waste. When you say there's this general zero waste target, what exactly is the target?
Well, we're aiming at zero waste. It'll be hard to achieve. We can't control everything that comes in, every commodity, every piece of merchandise that comes into Washtenaw County, but we are looking at addressing all those different types of disposal issues when people purchase. We need to figure out how we're going to handle the plastic film, the plastic bags. We don't know how we won't be able to achieve zero waste, but we like to keep our eye on that target, and we're going to have intermediate goals set up through the implementation process, and that'll be measurable. So we are going to be measuring as we get closer and closer, but to actually achieve is awfully hard.
I agree with you, and I think there are communities that are working really hard to get that, and I think the initial reduction is kind of low-lying fruit, and that's kind of easier, but I understand that as we try to get higher percentage, it's going to be harder. But looking around Ann Arbor, I mean, my daughter goes to Ann Arbor Public Schools. We have styrofoam trays in the classroom. You go out to any of the restaurants here, you cannot stop a straw from getting on your cup, no matter how much you try. I mean, how much of this plan is it really going to involve all the stakeholders really buying into this and really kind of creating some sort of system? I mean, a sticker that says we're not, like there's a whole push right now in communities to try and have like the no straw policy and, putting it in your window or whatnot and saying we won't provide a straw unless you ask for it, or we'll do a paper straw. I mean, like, how deep are you hoping to get with all these things?
Well, there's several ways we could do it. Washtenaw County oversees the inspection of the restaurants within Washtenaw County for their sanitary conditions. We have the ability to get into most of those restaurants, or all the restaurants, except the ones that are overseen by the Michigan Department of Public Ag. that will provide us a vehicle to provide information for folks and perhaps provide a cooperative purchasing agreements so we can get these things that are compostable and not have to be disposed of, and work on a cooperative purchasing initiative to get these per unit costs down on these containers, especially styrofoam and the compostable versus the compostable ones. But also looking at reusable containers too, educating the public on reusable containers. So those are some of the things. You want to go ahead?
When you're done. I was going to say, the other thing that Jeff mentioned at the end of the presentation is the PAC, so the Planning Advisory Committee. So that really, again, like you said, I think where the rubber hits the road really is a good way to describe that. We were lucky enough to have a really visionary planning committee for the solid waste planning process, and hitting a 100% diversion target as a goal, really your true north, to say this is where we want to go, we really want to be aggressive about it. But the PAC's going to be the way to take us there, and to give us those steps to say we're going to take these little measured steps to get us. And you mentioned a couple of really great things. My kids are in Saline schools, and they're also on the styrofoam containers, and it drives me crazy.
Which was sold to the schools as an environmental, because you could recycle them, but that's a different story. But so we've had a presentation on extending composting residentially, trying to do that year-round in Ann Arbor, and that doesn't even seem like it's 100% a go. And it doesn't include, so the restaurants. So it's nice to have them have compostable containers, but if they can't compost them, you're just wasting money. If you can't divert them from the landfill. So, I mean, are you guys looking to kind of connect with that as well?
Yep.
Okay.
I think we have a lot of work to do, to be totally fair and true. I mean, we have a lot of, we still have this, again, true north goal that's going to take us a while to get there, but at least it helps keep us continuing to shoot to that direction. And we've been lucky enough to have some really great partners, and every time we mention, we had done some efforts on plastic bags and single-use plastic bags, and how do we really get our first foot into that area. And we started to have partners kind of coming out of the woodworks, just some of the restaurants, some of the business communities, just people were interested in working with us on it. And so I'm hoping that will just continue to snowball.
I think that a lot of me and a lot of people around here are interested in, and by the way, thanks for your efforts with that Taste of Ann Arbor. I mean, that's a great first step to getting people to do these things. So thanks for that. And look forward to what you come up with.
Okay.
Thank you. And would you guys like a recommendation from this commission to Ann Arbor City Council to approve the waste plan update? Is that something that would be helpful?
It probably would, yes.
Okay.
I can tell you that council will ask for this commission's recommendation, for sure.
The other piece, too, that I'll put a plug in is the plan is still on public comment, as Jeff mentioned. That is the opportunity to get comments in on it. Once the plan is off of public comment, really there's not a lot of back and forth at that point. The next time that the city will see it is at that presentation. And so really I would encourage feedback or just taking a quick look at it, adding a couple of items, and if you have anything or asking us questions, this is the time to do so. So thank you.
Josh.
Sorry, just because you said now's the time to ask you questions. Two quick ones for you. I hope they're quick. The first is that when you were showing the data before, it looked like commercial diversion was low-hanging fruit. It's pretty low rate. You'd mentioned the zero waste efforts at Taste of Ann Arbor, but I'm curious if there's been thought into how to increase the commercial recycling and diversion rate.
How does the Taste of Ann Arbor or the?
Oh, no, I mean just in general. I think you showed 12% of the recycling is coming from.
Well, one of the things is we need to have the major generators report on what they're putting away. We don't get any reporting done from those major generators from the hospitals, other larger institutions within Washtenaw County. I think reporting is the first step. So we need to know where we are currently. That's one of the reasons I think some of those are averages, for that business sector. Those diversion rates, there are some numbers that are brought in from other various sources, but we need to be grabbing those numbers, better methodology for grabbing those numbers.
Great. And I guess my other question is just how to do with the funding piece. You said that there's you're trying to move away from tipping fees, and I'm just curious what some other options might even be.
Well, Western Washington Recycling Authority uses Public Act 185, which is an assessment district. And what we do is every 5 years, they have a capital improvement fund to build their facility. That was done in 2011. It's a 15-year debt that's spread amongst those households within that area that the authority to pay off that debt. And then there's also an operation and maintenance assessment for the annual operation maintenance for that facility. So that's the methodology we currently use within Washtenaw County for a portion of it. There's other ones that are used around the state. That could be up to a $25 per household charge. Some of them, it would be a little more cumbersome because we have existing millages. Some work in some communities and some work in others, but you better have your strategy of what you're trying to do before you implement a funding program. So we're taking it slow. But we'll throw these things out to the municipalities to see what might work.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Right. Thanks.
The next item on the agenda is a waste diversion site feasibility presentation by David Stett.
They've all got it electronically.
Let me close this one.
Yeah.
I think it's this one.
Right click, it'll go full screen.
Oh, right click.
Yeah, see full screen. And then as you click, it'll go forward.
Yeah, okay. So I'm David Stead with Resource Recycling Systems. We're a consulting firm based here in Ann Arbor. We work throughout the country on waste diversion, sustainability assessments, and fairly large practice area in sustainable packaging. We were engaged by the city and the county through a cooperative project to look at what was part of what we would call one of the potential implementation steps relative to the solid waste plan. And this really had to do with how do you increase convenience and accessibility to more diversion programs for residents throughout the county. So what we did was we really were looking at, what's the current system out there. We did a locational analysis. We look at what potential drop-off, what the options are for what we call drop-off stations. Some places call them convenience centers. And those, I'll talk about the range of types of facilities that we're talking about here. It's not just one type of facility. We looked at the plans and costs, funding options, which somebody just asked about, so you'll get a little more detail about what that might be. We're not, and then some recommendations on that. So the goal really was to kind of look at a comprehensive diversion strategy. This is not curbside recycling, but this is opportunities for diversion to provide more people with more access, more convenient throughout the county. And looked at locations to expand these types of facilities and to basically look at a set of siting options on how you would go about locating all of these facilities throughout the county. And also really looking at can you, what we would say, develop more opportunities for full service. And I'll go into a little bit more about what we mean by full service comprehensive versus what we might call just a recycling drop-off. So the idea here with a regional approach is that, we want to increase the amount of diversion and get more recyclables out of the waste stream. And I would say that includes, when I say recyclables, it also means organics, anything recoverable. And the idea that, if the county can develop a cooperative system with all the municipalities, then as Jeff had mentioned, there are some ways to possibly do cooperative marketing of the products, and as well as what he had mentioned, cooperative purchasing on the front end, which helps you get to waste reduction. And again, trying to look at this from diversion from landfills, reducing, helping our landfills last a little bit longer, and avoiding some tipping fees. The whole thing about creating some new jobs, and potentially if we can create enough volumes of materials, there might be economic opportunities for more material. And again, sharing these costs across the county. Right now, all the communities are basically do it somewhat on their own. The county does provide a little funding, and there was a mention about Western Washington. I'll talk a little bit about that, as a cooperative group of municipalities that are working in the western part of the county. So one of the things that we started with, and Jeff mentioned this, that the county had done this survey related to the solid waste plant, and we purposely asked some questions within that survey about drop-off stations and accessibility and what people wanted. So we were trying to get at, there was a lot of questions asked in that survey, but we asked some specific ones. So I just highlighted some of the answers here. Right now, the major big drop-off station we have a lot of, and I'll show you the maps of these, a lot of recycling drop-offs where just recyclables are accepted. We have one major drop-off station that accepts a lot of material. We have another one in Western Washtenaw that accepts a lot of materials, but not as much as the drop-off station on Ellsworth. So 35% of the respondents use that throughout the county. Most of those use it once a year, of those 35%. About a third of the residents respond and say we use it up to 4 times a year, so about once a quarter they're coming. And one of the very interesting things is here is that when you start looking at where people come from, they said 6 to 10 miles, and if you look at some of the survey data, which I'll show you in a little bit, you'll see a pretty good spread. People come from outside of the county to actually use this facility. I think that's mostly because people commute into this area, and they know that there's a facility here, so they're bringing things in. But we know that there are people that actually know these types of comprehensive facilities. There aren't very many of them around Southeast Michigan, and so they actually come here. Again, Jeff mentioned that a lot of what a comprehensive facility does versus just recycling is that you get at hard to recycle materials and hard to recover materials and bulky materials. So bulkies would be furniture, appliances, things that you can't really put at the curb, things that you're not going to get picked up on if you have curbside recycling you can't do there, or even if you have organic. So. And construction and demolition. So there's a lot of more materials that could potentially be recovered through this. Electronics, again, is another big item, and the 4 cleanup days that the county does, you get a lot of electronics, and even though we have some electronic cleanup days right here in Ann Arbor, there's still a lot of waste electronics that need to be collected or have a home for. And the other thing that we found out was just a lot of people said, it's just too far to go to these facilities. And that, again, was one of the premises here behind this was, what's the driver here? How convenient do these things need to be? I'm just going to go, you have these slides. This just shows what all of the types of materials and the facilities. Most of the facilities that we have in the county are what we call recycling drop-offs, where they're basically, you can bring your typical curbside recycling materials. You can't bring yard waste, you can't bring organics, you can't bring large bulky items, you can't bring furniture, you can't bring hard to recycle or light bulbs. So, but there are a lot of these, and the county has worked hard on developing these with communities over the year, and Western Washtenaw Authority operates a lot of these under that plan. So you have, I think you all got mailed a presentation, is that correct, Matt? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you can look at this. And in the full report, which I assume we'll make available to them too, there's more details. So you don't need to look through all of these right now. I just wanted to go through kind of what these existing facilities are. Again, the Ann Arbor Washtenaw drop-off station on Ellsworth Road is operated by Recycle Ann Arbor right now. And you can see that about half of the use is from the city of Ann Arbor, but again, you can see that the surrounding townships in the metro area use it quite a bit. And the other 2%, if you really look at some of the data of that, that's where you actually get people coming from outside of the county. But people come from the complete other side of the county, you know, to come to this type of facility. If you're not familiar with it, this is it's right across the street from the Southeast Area Park. And the old barn there, the old building there is where recyclables are processed, but there are tip walls with roll-off containers where other materials are dropped off, metal, organics, anything. You can basically take anything there other than household hazardous waste, and hopefully not pharmaceuticals, to dispose of it there. I'll talk to you in a minute a little bit about the challenges with that site. Well, here, I'll talk about it. This site has been in operation as a drop-off station since about the time the MRF was built, so about '94. Prior to that, that building was actually the original processing center for Ann Arbor recyclables when Recycle Ann Arbor was running processing. So that building has been in use for a long time in Ann Arbor. It's built on the old landfill. And which means it's really not the most stable ground in the world, and so there's a lot of structural issues that are there, and I'm sure you've had presentations on this before, discussions, but you know, it's on its last legs. In Western Washtenaw, the city of Chelsea actually operates a transfer station. And that transfer station has tip walls, and residents can bring just about anything there because it's actually a waste transfer facility. The Western Washtenaw Recycling Authority, which provides recycling services to 8 municipalities in the western area, actually runs their materials recovery facility at that same location. And so this is one of the larger facilities that has fairly comprehensive services on the western side of the county, and can take quite a bit of material. They're not really currently set up as kind of what we call a comprehensive one, where you can deal with some really difficult to recycle materials like fluorescent light bulbs and some of those other like fuel oil, like used oil, and some of those other materials you want to handle. But it is a large facility and is licensed as a solid waste facility. And then, so what we would then call both of those are comprehensive type drop-off facilities, where you can hopefully you can bring anything and other than hazardous materials. Although what we're talking about when we talk about comprehensive now, and what we were looking at, is that in fact we would locate the county's household hazardous waste facility, which is now by appointment and is located behind the Water Resource Commission offices on Zeeb Road, and you go there by appointment. One of the ideas here is we're going to develop comprehensive facilities where that would be available all hours that those facilities were open. So you wouldn't have to make an appointment. You would come through. There'd be trained personnel. There would be the right types of facilities there. And I'll show some diagrams of that in a little bit. But again, the one challenge is you have to be somewhat careful about how much solid waste you actually accept at these facilities, because at some point you become a licensed solid waste facility, which is a totally different type of facility than. And right now, the city's facility is not licensed in that manner. So here's a conceptual diagram of what a comprehensive facility would look like. And there's actually a place for, wish I had a little pointer. Where is it? Well, oh, I can use this? Oh, yeah. Okay. So we've actually, in this conceptual design, although this is actually based on the design of a facility that we worked on, you have a gatehouse, you have a tip wall where all these disposal materials are, or even recoverable like metals. You would just have a metal drop off for those. Household hazardous waste, which is a fenced with confinement built into it. So that people could just drop off and staff would just staff that. A recycling facility and barn, Organics would be, you could drop off on the tip wall, and then you could actually do things like purchase organics, like compost or other things on the way out. So kind of a one-stop shop for dropping off just about anything you needed to drop off. And the idea here is that, I'll show you the location analysis in a minute, that we would have more of these, or what we'd even call limited service ones, which is this one, which is where you could have limited quantities of waste and organics collection and some additional materials, not all the hard to recycle materials potentially, but you could drop off appliances and some bulky materials at these limited service ones. We call them limited service because the idea is that they would be open on like Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They would not be open like the comprehensive one, like 6 days a week. They would be open on a more limited basis, but you could bring more materials to them, again with the idea of creating more convenience and more access throughout the county, depending on what type of facility we locate where. And just a little schematic of kind of how the materials would flow, where you have, the idea is that there'd be a fenced area, and outside the fenced area, you would always allow recycling drop-off. So for recyclables, and these are, the idea here, and there's a little bit of a challenge here, but we hope we can manage it, is that you allow recyclables to be dropped off any time, but the limited service for waste disposal and some of the other materials would be gated and would be staffed for those times when it's open and can receive those materials. Fully utilizing cameras and other security to make sure that if people, one of the challenges that happens is that people drive up and they think it's open on Wednesday night and it's not, and they brought their trash and they just leave it anyway. So there's some issues about how you would manage those types of situations. But again, those are manageable. There are ways to manage those situations. And then we have what we call the single stream recycling drop-offs, and that's what we have a lot of those throughout the county right now. Western Washtenaw operates a lot of these, and they're located in several locations throughout the county. So part of what we did was look at this whole system and look at what kinds of options we want to look at. So we're really looking at 3 types of options and what's kind of the best mix of convenience out there. That's just a little diagram of a drop-off, but these are very small quarter-acre things, and a lot of them are in township halls, parking lots, and things like that, where they just have 2 or 3 roll-off containers and residents can pull up. One of the things we did was based on the survey, and there are 2 studies that were done, one in the greater Lansing area related to drop-off systems and convenience and what people would want, and we did a comprehensive study in the state of Ohio about this, and we used a lot of the criteria from there about what people said about what makes it convenient. And so even a little bit of the survey response where people said it's a little too far and people will drive maybe 6 to 10 miles. What we did is develop a set of criteria mostly determined by time. And we used a program, a GIS program, where we can locate, we identified all of the public areas that we thought were viable, publicly owned pieces of land in the county. We took out things like parks because we had a discussion. We determined that parks were probably not even though they're big publicly owned pieces of property, it's probably not the right place to put a waste or recycling facility. For the most part, but there's a lot of land, police stations, fire stations, township halls, Department of Public Works lots. There's a lot of properties that are owned, so all of those went into our assessment saying these could all be potentially be sites. And we used a lot of criteria to then determine and optimize what a system would look like based on 20-minute drive, a 25-minute drive, access roads, are there good access roads, what's the size of the site, what would that system look like. You saw a little picture of this, and so we did a lot of scenarios. We're just showing you a couple here. We ran a lot of scenarios about what would a system look like and where would things be located, and because we could play with, okay, let's constrain how many people it's 20-minute drive, but let's constrain that only X amount of households should be access it, so that it's not. So we played with a lot of those things. The one that came out the most balanced was one that had about 25 facilities, and so if you, and this, what you see, these little lines, these are all 20-minute drive times. The model actually uses real roads, so it's not straight line driving, it's actually real road time based on GIS information. And it came up with a set of locations. A lot of these, we played with scenarios because we knew where a lot of facilities are currently located, so we ran scenarios where we said, okay, let's constrain this by these. We know that there's one in Milan, and we know there's a location in Milan right now, and it's working, so let's just say, let's keep that one in the analysis. They already have one, and the city's already operating, and they're happy with it. Those are the types of things we did, and came up with a model that said about 25 facilities would give everybody really good access. Well, we also knew that we wanted to provide more comprehensive facilities. So we did things like, what would it look like if you wanted, sorry about the overlap there, if you wanted to provide comprehensive facilities for the entire county? And we used a 45-minute drive time scenario for that. And it basically said, well, four facilities would serve the entire population of the county with good convenience for comprehensive, meaning a facility that you could bring everything there. We then kind of combined the fact that some of these locations you would take some of these locations off of the other one. When you start to combine this, we came up with a solution set that was about 22 facilities that could serve this. And we looked at then the fact that we know that we probably don't need 4 fully comprehensive facilities. So the scenario here really that we analyzed, and you'll see the cost information on, was a full-service facility in the Ann Arbor area, a full-service facility in the Chelsea area, and then the other 2 locations in the Ymca Township area and in the Scioto Township area were what we designated as limited service, so that they were available on a weekly basis, but not all the time. And then all of the rest of the facilities throughout the county of the 18 were recycling drop-offs. So people had convenience for recycling all the time. So that was the scenario that we actually wound up developing capital costs on. And we looked at a new build. We knew that the drop-off station in Ann Arbor right now couldn't sustain a new build. There are locations that are available that you would build on a greenfield. We looked at the Chelsea transfer station and talked with them, and they were happy to say, yes, we would be more than glad to host a more comprehensive facility. So we did some preliminary calculations and engineering on how that site would have to be modified. It's already functioning as a site for waste transfer and for the recycling processing, materials coming in from the curbside programs and the drop-offs there. Then 2 new builds, green builds for the limited service, and then upgrades. I think we, out of the other facilities, we added 2 new recycling drop-offs, and basically through our conversations with the existing ones, they were all happy with them, so we just said, well, we'll make sure that they're all upgraded and all have the same level of service. Meaning, same types of materials, same types of drop-offs, all with concrete pads, so you have a good foundation for all these locations, good signage, same signage all the way across. So the analysis and the financial analysis, we really had 2 full-service facilities, 2 limited service, and 18 recycling drop-offs. Part of the concept here is, and why we did this cost analysis, and I'll have to say, these are numbers based on our experience with designing and building these types of facilities in other places. These are not numbers that were quoted, and the whole process would be the county will have to decide how they're going to go out and fund and facilitate this. But again, these are conceptual engineering costs that we've put together here, but feel pretty good about them. We needed to provide to the county and to the city information about what the total capital would be and what the range of operating costs would be. And what does that wind up being on a net cost per household basis? Because when you start talking about funding this countywide system, the best metric we can come up with that we talk about is what's the cost per household. Not the cost per ton, because every household generates different volumes of material, and the way that this would typically get funded would be on a household basis. Kind of like you fund your programs now on a tax basis, but that basically means that every household's paying relatively close to the same amount of money. So we've provided this information, talking about the funding options that you would then have. Jeff mentioned hauler licensing. That's been used in the state where you license haulers and then you assess a fee on them to pay for the system. You know, the more competition and the more diverse your set of services are, because not every hauler provides the same set of services, that becomes a kind of a question, you know, because you can't necessarily say to every hauler who's providing services in the county that you shall provide this type of service. You can license them, but you can't tell them what they actually have to do. Act 185, Jeff talked about, that's what Western Washtenaw uses, and that's basically an assessment, goes on the tax rolls every year, and as Jeff said, you can break it into a capital component and an operating component, and so that assessment would change on a schedule. It's not, you wouldn't just set it up, it would depend on what your system costs are. And part of the system cost is driven by, when you go back to what we model, what's the revenue side of that? It's not just the cost side, but there's revenues that would be included in that. And so when you go out to find a service provider to provide these systems, part of what you're asking them for is they're contributing revenue to the system to help it operate. There are a couple others that Jeff mentioned where you can do up to $50 per household on one of them, or $25 per household on another one, and they're used throughout the state already. You know, those just depend on whether or not the county board just assesses it without having to go out to a vote, or whether they have, there's mechanisms and procedures that you have to follow to enact any one of these. So all of them are going to be questions that the Board of Public, ultimately the Board of Public Works and the County Board of Commissioners would have to address. And so again, part of why this is a study that's going along at the same time, at the same pace as the solid waste plan is, we want to present kind of a comprehensive, you have some implementation decisions that you could start working on right away relative to implementing the solid waste plan. But how you fund it is going to be, as you can well imagine, is the tough issue to deal with here. So the recommendations really are that we should develop a comprehensive system, and it's really kind of an important to recovery and diversion, and to in the world of potential increasing disposal costs in the future and limited landfills. Because again, 15 years for a landfill life of the current landfill, and whether or not it ever gets expanded, that happens fairly quickly, and it takes a long time for. If we want to decide a new land, it takes a long, long time for a landfill to get expanded and built, if we were even wanted to support it. Again, several new recycling drop-off locations could be developed with this plan, and hopefully using a lot of the existing sites. And all of this would have to happen in phases, and our recommendation is really look at the two comprehensive facilities first and try to get those in place, because they're really cornerstones, because you need facilities that can handle all materials. If you don't have one of those, then I think you're going to have some other difficult issues on the curb and with some of the other collection programs. They do divert a lot of material. Again, then looking at the limited service, and then again, since a lot of the recycling drop-offs are in place, and we're only recommending that 2 be added to that system. That it's a fairly well-established system. Western Washington is funding a lot of them already through their Act 185 program. And so that would be kind of the final phase for implementation to do that. So this is our recommendations. This is going to the Board of Public Works. It's really as part of their consideration as to what they want to do. I think what this really is, though, because the city of Ann Arbor was involved in this, the city of Ann Arbor recognizes, and a lot of other communities recognize that we've spoken with about this, is that this needs to be a cooperative project, and you're going to have to go out and get a private sector operator to run this system, and you're going to have to figure out how to cooperatively fund this, which is probably the biggest challenge that the Board of Public Works will have to deal with, which is how do you fund this, what's the funding mechanism, and how do you go get all of the communities to want to participate in finding a solution that provides a convenient option for all the materials that we're trying to manage here so that we can divert more things and make sure they go to the right place. So I think I went through that pretty quickly. I wanted to save a little time for you. So that's our presentation. I don't know if Jeff, you want to add anything, or Greg or anything? So it's been great. It's been a good cooperative project between the city and the county, and I think this is a great first step as to how do you think about implementing the things in the solid waste plan.
I'm sorry, I think I have a very basic question, but the drop-off locations at curbside, would that be in communities, does every one of these communities have curbside recycling?
Oh, no. No. So that's why you have recycling drop-offs, because not every community provides curbside recycling. The drop-off, the comprehensive drop-offs are not just recycling, they're waste. You bring anything. Waste, organics, yard waste, appliances.
Right, and I'm familiar with the one in Ann Arbor because we have used it. So are you asking some communities then to subsidize the fact that others are not doing pickup, curbside pickup?
You mean in terms of providing them with recycling drop-off facilities? So they're not, so some communities aren't providing curbside, but they are providing, right now we have a series of recycling drop-off stations for those communities that don't provide services, meaning they don't, it's all subscription-based, so parts of the county, communities that have chosen and are just too small have basically said, we're not going to provide or contract for the collection services the way Ann Arbor does through their tax base, and so it's subscription-based. And yes, I think that's part of the challenge is to say we're providing this comprehensive system. So for instance, if somebody is contracting, this gets into the challenge Jeff was talking about how do you do funding when you have certain communities that are funding parts of the system already. So the question becomes, how do you credit them? With the fact that City of Ann Arbor already provides services, so how does the funding mechanism actually work? Because the city could say, we're already paying X amount for this and this, that's our credit into the system. So those are challenges that the Board of Public Works and county staff are going to have to figure out in terms of what does a comprehensive funding system look like when you have all these different communities that are basically providing different levels of service or paying for it a different way.
Right, because I'm assuming that as a member of this community, and we do have curbside recycling, that part of my bill includes the curbside recycling. Yep. So in essence, you would be asking some communities to pay double for, so I think that's going to be tricky.
Yeah, well, and that's a question. How does this work when you have some communities using tax base to fund for it, some are using fees to pay for it. Western Washington has already gone forward with Act 185 to pay for it. So City of Chelsea, all the communities out in the western part went forward with an Act 185 funding mechanism to fund their system. So you wouldn't necessarily impose additional costs on Western Washington, who already has it, it might be because they're already providing a bulk of that service. But there may be additional costs involved here to provide a comprehensive system in the county. And so, yes, communities that are doing certain things and paying for certain things may be asked to pay more. Some communities will be asked to pay. If they're doing nothing, they're going to be asked to pay into the system. And that's part of the challenge of the next phase of going out, and how do you talk to communities about how do you finance a system?
Because the comprehensive and the limited makes sense, because it seems like that's somewhere you can pool everybody's resources, and everybody needs that, and so making it
And a lot of people are
accessible.
using them when you look at the data.
Right. The other one is just interesting, and as a member of Ann Arbor, I mean, it's just interesting.
Yeah, if you're providing, for instance, in Ann Arbor, the question would be, if you're providing curbside recycling, you don't really need a recycling drop-off facility in your community. And, do you get credit for the fact that we're already providing the recovery system?
Oh, go ahead.
So if there was going to be a comprehensive drop-off station in Ann Arbor, why would it also be necessary to have a limited service one in Ypsilanti? Couldn't the...
It's about how far people are willing to really drive to bring things to it. So, part of the discussion was, we looked at, if you look at a 45-minute drive, you really, and you say, we want everybody to have access within 35 to 45 minutes. It really, our analysis said, you really need more than one. You need more than two. Whether or not, and again, I think this is why part of phasing it in is important. You want to phase it in, see what the usage looks like, and then move to the next phase. Part of our recommendation, let's not do this all at once, let's phase it in, evaluate, phase in, evaluate.
Are there any interesting kind of incentive programs that you've seen in other parts of the country? I know this is a sticky wicket because you have the whole county and all these different, communities handling things differently, but I'm just curious if there's some interesting kind of carrot/stick approaches for being able to encourage people to put less into the waste stream, more into recycling, more into compost, things like that, that you've seen around the country or the world that has been successful that we might be able to learn from?
The most successful really becomes in what I would call is how you price waste. And then in communities that have gone to variable pricing schemes, or variable, the other one is a variation, but it's a little more difficult. I think people are price sensitive. But variable can size. So those are two great ways to kind of move people out of the trash can, the waste can, into other materials. But you have to be able, but you can't do that if you don't provide access to the service. I can tell you some horror stories about California that you brought up in terms of what they're trying to do, and some of the ways that some of those communities have tried to do it that have wound up with a lot of, I would say, not good unintended consequences. For instance, the state of California just decided that going to glass processors, any place in the state, is a solid waste now, not a recyclable, because so much of little stuff, little recyclable, little things like K-cups and all the stuff, when you process stuff at a MRF, all that little stuff winds up in the glass stream, and it's typically all waste. And so people are putting lots of stuff into the recycling thing, and a lot of it's winding up in the glass. And the state of California just said, you know what? All that glass is solid waste now because there's too much waste in it. It's just being transferred through the recycling system into the glass system in California, and so they have a real problem there. Yeah, even though it looks like you put a lot of stuff in the recycling system, the state just said, guess what? all of the glass processors now have to be solid waste facilities. And let me tell you, that's creating a huge, I'm not sure if the state legislature is going to override the regulatory agencies, but it's, you know, those are kind of the difficulties when you move to some of these incentive programs, and you have to do them really carefully in terms of how do you know, price or size the waste collection system to get people to put more things in. You know, there are, you tried rewards program, there's lots of things that people have tried. Some things work in some communities, some don't. You know, it depends a lot on the demographics, it depends a lot on education. And carefully implementing things like variable pricing. You have to do it really carefully. You get unintended consequences.
But I think there is a happy medium somewhere along those lines. Because I think there is a cost to having the system. And I think we discussed this when we were talking about the solid, the compost. But I think that you can say this is the base and this is the space that you get. You want, you know, an extra tip-off, you know, bin or a larger bin, then you pay a little bit more. I mean, I think there's a happy medium too. And I think, unfortunately, that's what works to me. I think when it hurts people's wallets, that's where it kind of works. So hopefully.
Education can work, but you have to have a really comprehensive system that
yes,
that is working all the time, not twice a year or 3 times a year, every day. You know, you can do it, but it's very tough.
From the surveying work that you've done and possibly your work in other locations, it's going to be like a chicken or the egg type question, but just expanding the network of facilities, is that going to, is there demand out there to make use of those facilities?
Based on the survey work, yeah, people want it, and they want it more convenient. That's the biggest thing, is they want it to be convenient. You know, and where that, you know, for us, it's about a 15 or 20-minute drive, and once you get beyond that, people, it's not worth. Because somebody can do that on an errand then. Mm-hmm. If you have to make a special trip, then it's not worth it for people to do it. And that's kind of what the surveys have borne out. It needs to be convenient, and that means time.
So kind of in that vein, I'm wondering if in any of the GIS or mapping work you've looked at not just distances, but like commute patterns, to see if there could be any optimization in terms of how folks are traveling.
We didn't really look, and I'm not sure whether we have good commute pattern data. Maybe we do, but we didn't do that. We could, but
yeah, I'd have to check and see what kind of data we have available through Eli and some of that work.
Yeah, I'm not sure, you know, how well. We know from some of the surveys at the current drop-off station that, you know, we know where people are coming from, and some of those questions have been, you know, I came into Ann Arbor and I commute, so I'm using it. Mm-hmm. You know, and some of them are, I just made a special trip and I do it once a year. Mm-hmm. You know, I just save it up. But no, we didn't look at that. You could look at that, but I'm not aware of you know, good commute data, and like where are people actually commuting from? Mm-hmm. So interesting question, yeah.
You do probably have census data so that you know where the people are. So yeah. Where the number, did you look at optimizing the minimum miles traveled to deal with all this?
Yeah, we looked, so we have a lot of constraints in our, we played with a lot of, we said minimum time, minimum miles, you know, we looked at a lot of scenarios, and but again, we came back and basically reported mostly as a time, because we know based on the survey that is what drives people's decisions. It's not, they don't talk about, oh, that's 10 miles, they talk about, oh, that's 10 minutes.
And then finally, I noticed the Calvert's facility on Jackson Road wasn't included in your data.
That's a private facility owned by a private company, and they have their own plans for that facility. So we determined that for the long basis, the publicly owned properties would be what you need to focus on, because private sector properties, they change ownership, they change plans, they have their own plans. We found that in communities where we tried to locate recycling drop-off stations in corners of shopping center parking lots. Worked great until the shopping center owner changed, and the new owner said, I don't really want that in the corner of my parking lot, thank you very much. So we felt that, if we're going to build a system, we need to build it on a system that we feel is publicly, maybe you could, do a long-term contract with some private sectors, but again, we didn't, we couldn't go out and talk to private sector property owners and say, would you be interested in a 20-year contract to locate a facility on your property?
A lot of good work here. I think there's a couple of general statements to be made about this. One is that I think people should be a little wary about the amount of time that it takes to do something regionally like this. I think I worked with your firm 15 years ago on when we were going to redo the drop-off station down at the landfill, and we still haven't done anything in that because we've been trying to do a regional approach, and there's some talk about doing a regional MRF facility, and if we wait 15 years for that, I think we've lost a lot. But good work.
That is all up to Megan. It's a huge challenge, and the Board of Public Works, I don't think they will underestimate that it's a huge challenge, and I think, the Water Resource Commissioner, I think, understands it's a huge challenge.
And I think you're right to try and use as much of the existing limited drop-off stations as possible, because one of the things, people get used to using them. And so if you eliminated a bunch of those and went to less facilities, people would have to then change their their drop-off patterns, and you'd lose a bunch of people and everything. So
yes,
I think it's good.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Can I add just one thing?
Yep.
For those of the commission who may not know, David Stead was on City Council, one of the original creators of the Environmental Commission, and chaired this board for many, many years. So I just wanted to make sure people knew the kind of level of local public service that David provided.
Thank you.
All right. Next on the agenda is report from committees. Commissioner Slavic, can you give an update on pollinators?
Yes, we've met twice, and we've assembled a broad group of participants so far. And right now we're working on compiling a more detailed inventory of all the pollinator conservation work.
Thank you.
Sorry. Should I start over? Right now, we're trying to compile an inventory of all the pollinator conservation work in the area. And by the end of our next meeting, we'll probably have our vision and mission ready to go and ready to share.
Great. Thank you. Other commissions? Energy Commissioner Appleyard, can you give an Energy Commission update?
We are moving ahead on trying to create some community solar. We have a subcommittee that's starting to meet on that. We had a good discussion about the Citizens Climate Lobby's proposal for carbon tax, and passed a resolution on that to support that. We had a good discussion about the memo that's currently in limbo with staff about the use of the $165,000 that's been allocated for climate action plan, and we're hoping that we'll hear something soon about that. And we are going to be working on some other issues on creating transparency and reporting on energy issues. So we're looking at potentially, if we can get it through, to have people report their energy use when a home goes up for sale. We're looking at Chicago just recently instituted it into their MLS system, which is their marketing system for realtors. They basically added a line to it, and one of the things that it stalled us before is figuring out how to do this without creating a whole system that required person power and everything to keep it going, and so we're going to look into actually doing that locally.
Thank you. Commissioner Apple, do you have an update from Parks?
Very brief, Gallup Park bike path is resurfaced.
All right.
That's exciting for those commuters out there that use that every day.
Great, thank you.
You can easily tell the difference between that was resurfaced and that which is not.
And Commissioner Gibb Randall, do you have an update from planning?
I would just say that we had our first public hearing on the solar ordinance, and I got a bunch of feedback from community members about it, mostly centered around the neighborhood where there was some controversy on Brockman Street, mostly neighbors from that area that came and shared with Planning Commission. So there was draft language in front of us. This is beyond the working session that we had with the Energy Commission. There was draft language in front of us, and I would say that there's still some tweaking that will likely happen based on screening requirements and things like that that still forthcoming. So still in the works, not ready to go on to City Council yet, but is certainly part of our active agenda that we're working on in the near future.
Great, thank you. We will skip the report from council since we don't have any council people present. Can we get a report from staff?
Sure, I'll be brief. There was a public meeting at the library on work going on by Michigan Department of Environmental Quality around arming cleaners. So additional site delineation, soil borings. The state has some additional money they can spend on this project, so they're going to be doing some feasibility studies to see whether there might be some in situ technologies, material you could actually inject at the site rather than demolishing kind of two buildings and taking out all the material. So that's positive. It's underway. A couple of members of the public came to that meeting, and DEQ staff were there. If any of the members of the public are watching and have questions, feel free to contact me and I can get you in touch with the DEQ staff. That's a project that DEQ is running, and we're just assisting. They're going to have a temporary lab that we're going to host down at our Wheeler Center, make it easier for them, as they're working, and that'll be through July and August. Gelman, we've intervened, and the court has denied a request by the company to not let us intervene, so that is continuing, and other than that, I can't talk about anything. I can say that there were two emergency rulemakings that set a new standard for 1,4-dioxane and changed it from 85 down to 7.2. That rulemaking can only be done twice, and it expires in October. I'm hearing that it's unlikely that the full rule package that would change the standards for all 308 chemicals is not going to be ready and approved by October, so it is likely that the state will do a rulemaking for just 1,4-dioxane, so that will be changed and ready to go in October, and the rest of that package would come later in the year. We are going to be updating our hazard mitigation plan. It's something all communities have to do under emergency management. What's interesting here is there's a lot of work that's been going on to integrate climate adaptation into those, because historically you're looking at, well, the weather looked like this and it's going to keep looking like that. Our emergency manager, Rick Norman, received a grant from the state. Stantec's been hired to work with us. and there's a clear focus on climate and climate adaptation. So as that, the first meeting's going to kick off next week, but as that process moves forward, I'm sure reports and materials are going to be brought to this commission. Anyone who's interested in participating, feel free to contact me, and I can get you engaged. There was a meeting for the water rate study that's begun. Susan Hutton and I are both participating. I'm wearing my, I'm a consumer hat, not my commission hat or staff hat. And that's going forward. I shared WUOM radio report on stateside where there's a real interest in looking at equity in water rates, and Philly's got a new program, and that's already been raised as part of that process. So I think the last thing is in terms of waste, there's been direction from the administrator to staff to start looking at zero waste event guidelines for all city permanent events, and also how do we build environmentally preferable procurement into the way city does business. And so work is underway on that right now, and I think as soon as it's likely you're going to see zero waste proposals come before you, could be as early as August, you know, based on some work that other cities have undertaken. I think I'll stop there, and if there's any questions, let me know.
Great. Any questions from the commission? All right. Do we need to do that library thing again?
Yes, we'll just hold it up one last time. If
Is anyone
folks
still
can,
watching?
there we go.
Green team.
So,
Space. Any items for the next agenda? Well, our next scheduled meeting is August 24th. Last call for public comment. Don't all rush up at once. All right, so if there's no further business to come before the commission, this meeting will now adjourn at 9:13 p.m.
thank you.